lost to ignorance and confusion, three men arose from humble beginnings with a message of wisdom and hope for their troubled times. Three men who would eventually change the very face of humanity. But they were not the droids we're looking for. So, here are some other guys.
It's Song Talk Radio with Michael, Neil, Phil, and the gang.
Hi there, folks, and welcome back to the show. How much more excited can I be? And the answer to that, my friends, is none. None more excited because tonight we are talking about one of my favorite movies, the 1984 cult classic mockumentary, This is Spinal Tap, directed by Rob Reiner and starring Christopher Guest, Michael McKean, Harry Shearer, and Rob Reiner. Now, we normally talk about songwriting here on the show, but every now and then we like to change it up. We do a songwriting draft, or we like to talk about movies. And we're talking about movies tonight because who doesn't like hanging out with their friends and talking about movies? And, of course, our friends tonight are here, and it's going to be a fun show. Mr. Michael Proudfoot, how are you doing?
I'm doing quite well, thank you. And, excited to talk about this movie. It's fantastic. Just watched it again, and it's like, listen to an album because you know every bit. And, it was great fun to have this assignment.
Of course, Blair Packham, how you doing?
I'm good. I also enjoyed rewatching the movie. It's it's so rich and iconic, and I also know almost every word.
And, of course, Neil Modi is with us tonight.
All right, then. Well, I'd just like to say that I was on my way here, and there was puddles outside of the studio, and I thought to myself, this is Song Talk Radio, not the bleeding splash show.
Okay, that's the Simpsons show. That's a different.
Well, that's when we were on The Simpsons, you know. I got to stop with the accent. Okay, that's not going to.
Yeah, I think you do.
I'm not going to sustain that for the entire show.
Well, it just proves that there's such a fine line between clever and stupid.
Oh,
yeah.
Yes. And of course, assisting on the tech is Micah. How you doing?
Good. Awesome.
Keeping an ever watchful eye on the social stream is Linda Lavender.
Right.
Linda doesn't have a mic. Project.
Hi, Linda.
Speak really loud.
Live television.
And assisting her is Rita Nyanga.
Hey.
Hey.
No, he wasn't.
Even further away from the microphone.
Well, I tried. So while the show is going on, why don't you send us a tweet at Song Talk Radio. Send us a email to feedback at Song Talk Radio, and let us know your thoughts and your memories of the show. So let's go around and find out how we all sort of discovered this show, this movie. Because it's an interesting movie. Let's start off with Blair. How did you come across the show?
I was visiting New York City and had heard about this movie. In those days, no internet. So I read an item in Rolling Stone magazine or something like that. And there were no rock movies around then. I mean, there were rock movies before that. Hard Day's Night, Help, the Beatles. They were few and far between. So the idea that there was a movie coming out that was about rock music, especially in the early 80s, this was a rarity. And so I was with the bass player for my old band, Matthew Greenberg from the Jitters, and we were visiting record companies, basically, dropping off demos, and we thought how fitting that we go and see a rock movie in New York, where some of the action purports to take place. It doesn't actually, but it's supposed to take place. And so we went to a movie theater and we watched it. He didn't think it was as funny as I did because he was more steeped in sort of rock culture. He was taking it personally. He was a little annoyed afterwards. He was like, I don't see what's so funny about that. He got it later, but in the moment, I was like, man, this is skewering everything that I think is silly about rock music.
Yeah.
So it was great.
Michael, how about you?
I think so. When that came out, I would have been working at City TV with a bunch of people toward launching Much Music. So I think it was kind of in the air at the time. So, but I remember seeing it at I can't remember the theater, cinema, whatever, movie theater on Danforth and Greenwood. The same place that
the Roxy?
Roxy.
Oh,
the Roxy Theater,
Horror.
which is now
Wow.
Tim Hortons.
Oh, excellent.
Blast from the past.
Anyway, so I saw it there, and it was just great. I was howling. Yeah. Loved it.
Neil, how did you come across this film?
So as far as I remember, this movie came out in 1984. I probably didn't hear about it until a few years later in high school, probably in the middle of high school when all my friends were talking about it. And we probably watched it on VHS at somebody's house. That's how I first came across it. And then probably didn't see it again until many, many years later.
Right.
Because we recognized it as the satire that it was, back then. But I don't know, just never visited it again after that. But we always remembered that one joke that I'm sure we're going to get to.
Oh yes, there's tons of them.
Yeah.
How about you, Phil?
Well, I think one of the reasons thank you for asking, Michael. One of the reasons I love this movie so much is because the way I came across it.
Yeah.
Because you see, kids, there was a time when you didn't actually know what was going to be on your TV. So what you would do
You always
is
check the TV guide.
Oh, tell us more, Uncle Phil.
yeah, back in the day. So you would basically just be surfing around channels looking for something to watch.
Yep.
And I had come across, I was flipping, and it was on, I think it was on City, but I'm not sure. And there was this documentary about rock bands. And I was kind of watching it, and I thought, wow, these guys are really ridiculous. But I actually thought it was real, and it wasn't until they get to the part where there's the party, and I sort of recognized Fran Drescher, but she didn't look like what she looked like before, and I thought, well, maybe that's someone who just talks like her, But when I saw Billy Crystal as part of the mimes,
Mime is money.
Mime is money.
Don't talk back, mime is money.
Dana Carvey was one of the other ones.
Yeah.
That's when I figured out that
So
it was a joke.
before we go any further, maybe we should just take a moment for the kids out there and the kids in the room here who don't know what this is Spinal Tap
Perhaps
actually
not everyone
is.
has seen this movie, so
Yes.
let's
So
bring them
what
up
do we
to speed.
Give
Well,
them a
that is-
little primer.
If you
on
haven't
it.
seen this movie, you should. This is Spinal Tap. Is a 1984 American mockumentary film directed and co-written by Rob Reiner. It stars Christopher Guest, Michael McKean, and Harry Shearer as members of the fictional British heavy metal band Spinal Tap, and Reiner as Marty DeBerge, a documentary filmmaker who follows them on their American tour. The film satirizes the behavior and musical preferences of rock bands and the hagiographic tendencies of rock documentaries.
Hagio, what?
Hagiographic, which actually
That means saint making.
saintly making, yeah.
okay.
Some the kind of those approaches to movies like Give Me Shelter from 1970, The Song Remains the Same, 1976, and Last Waltz in 1978. Most of the dialogue was improvised, and dozens of hours were filmed. One of the things also which threw me off is because I had just seen, so this had been out for a long time, and I hadn't actually heard about it. I had actually seen, I think it's called The Decline of Western Civilization.
Right,
By Penelope
Spheeris.
Spheeris. That's
Yes,
correct. yeah. Who went on to direct
Part
Wayne's
2,
World.
The Metal Gears,
Such a great movie.
which is a great movie.
It's a great movie.
But I swear some of the people who were
Oh,
in
yeah.
that were in this. So that's why I thought it was a real movie.
Yeah.
And which is why it grabbed me so much.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know what it was. And so I was just watching this thing going, what is this movie? Because, of course, it was just playing on TV.
So you hadn't heard about it?
I hadn't heard about it
What
at
year
all.
roughly would this have been?
Obviously, it was, I think because I had just seen The Decline of Western Civilization Part 2 in the at the Bloor Cinema.
would that be
And so that would be like
87?
88.
So a few years had passed since
Yeah.
Spinal
Gone
Tap.
by.
So were you in bands at that point?
Yes.
Because it seems to me that bands took to Spinal Tap, This is Spinal Tap first.
Yeah.
And all those expressions about turn it up to 11, for instance, which
Yeah.
comes from Spinal Tap.
Yeah.
When you hear that, that's where it comes
That's where
from.
I get, that's where I got it from, yeah.
Yeah. And so if you were in a band, you would hear all that stuff all the time. People would be
Drummers exploding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When my band got a record deal with Capitol Records, the
What year would that be?
1987, and the president of the label at the time, Sir Richard Littleton, he became a night later. He was a Brit who came to Canada to lead the label. He reminded me so much of Patrick McNee, who played Sir Dennis Eaton Hogg, the head of the label in Spinal Tap. And he was an Englishman, and he was very proper, and he was a lovely fellow. And so that when at the end of the of the welcoming ceremony for us, they asked me to say a few words as the leader of the band. And I had a drink in my hand, and this is in their corporate offices, and the whole label, all the promo team, everybody's there. And I all I could think of saying was, "And so say we, tap into America,"
Right.
like that, which is what Dennis Eaton Hogg says
Right,
in the
of
movie.
course, yeah.
And I don't think most of the people at the label had seen the movie, but because we were the new signing, they all went,
Oh, very
as if
clever.
I
No
was
matter
the
what you
funniest
said
fellow.
was going to be very
exactly,
funny.
exactly.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but okay, so they set up this movie, and these guys are actors, but they also wrote the songs for the fictional band,
Yes.
Spinal
Yeah.
Tap,
Yeah.
and then they actually did become a band and went on tour and did the whole band thing, correct?
Yeah, but really that was in reaction to the success of the movie. They didn't
Right.
become a band for real.
And so when they actually had their musical careers, there was no longer satire. Now they're doing it for real.
Well, it was pretty
I think it was-
satirical.
it was
if you
the
see
audience
the
got
clips
it.
on, if the audience watched it and took it seriously, I suppose that's up to them. But
Right,
I think
okay.
it was still meant to be pretty satirical.
Oh yeah, I think
Yeah, it was.
I mean, they all, sorry to interrupt. Christopher Guest, Nigel Tufnell,
Yeah.
he went on to make Waiting for Guffman and
Mighty
Best in
Wind
Show and The Mighty
Yeah.
Wind. I mean,
Okay.
he's a full-time director-actor. you
Yeah,
know.
and all those movies are done in the same kind of improvisational spirit.
Yeah.
Where you
With
kind of
many
give
of
you
the
a
same
a
structure
mockumentary.
of, yeah, they're all mockumentaries.
A rockumentary, if you will, which is what Marty DeBurgi, the
Yes,
fictional
yes.
director, says. Yeah.
But I think this was maybe not the first, but it was definitely the first really popular mock doc.
Yeah.
The first mock documentary.
certainly the one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Certainly the one I
It
was
started,
aware of.
I believe, like the band or this concept had existed between Michael McKean and Christopher Guest. They'd done it somewhere else and
Actually,
Yeah.
wanted to flesh it
they
out.
worked
Is that
with
right?
Harry Shearer and Rob Reiner on a TV pilot in 1978 for a sketch comedy show called The TV Show, which featured a parody rock band called Spinal Tap.
Oh.
During the production of the sketch, while being burned with oil from an onstage effect, McKean and Guest began to improvise, inventing characters that became David St. Hubbins and Nigel Tufnell.
Ah, okay.
And McKean actually he plays in Better Call Saul.
That's right.
When you
Yeah.
see him, like, what an amazing actor he is.
Incredible actor.
Just
And spoiler alert, he's been written out eventually of that show. But
Yes.
but unbelievable final scenes. My goodness, what a great actor.
Yeah, definitely. Great.
And great as David St. Hubbins, too.
Well, we were talking.
And the accents for Americans
Pretty good.
Pretty good.
actually
yeah.
really good. Yeah.
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 What I thought was really interesting was, we were talking about Bohemian Rhapsody before, and a movie that I actually quite enjoyed, but basically was not representative of being in any band I've ever been close to. I mean, the whole thing was quite fictional.
Yeah.
Whereas this is actually, I mean, if you've been in bands, especially bands that have been together for a long time,
Yeah. And had ups and downs.
and had ups and downs, you really,
Yeah.
like, I could identify with. I've gone through every one of those things in
Yeah.
bands I've been in.
Well, there's a scene where they play an army base, and there's a sign, a marquee, and it says "Puppet Show" and "Spinal Tap."
Yeah, right.
Right. I took a photograph of the El Macombo marquee when Live Aid. It said "Live Aid on TV" and the Jitters, and I wrote and like this is in my scrapbook. I wrote underneath. Puppet Show and Spinal Tap underneath. So yeah, I mean,
that happens.
yeah, sure. Getting lost backstage, that
Oh,
thing
God,
where
yeah, that-
Yeah, yeah.
rock and
Funny.
rock and roll, and you're trying to find the stage door. I mean, that happens all the time.
It's amazing that for a bunch of guys, none of whom were in a rock band, how true to life so much of that was.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true.
So I
I'd
wonder-
seen,
wonder if they
I
did-
saw
did-
Toto in at Busch Gardens, West Virginia, and they're playing a theme park in the daytime,
Yes.
So
Yes.
it actually makes
and
you,
they were just hating it.
okay, it kind of makes me wonder, like these guys are filmmakers and actors. Did they do their research, quote unquote? Did they interview rock bands, or did they know people who toured
they-
with them or whatever?
I mean, I think they just knew it.
or there was tropes that everyone
I
kind
think
of
they
knew.
knew. Well, no, I think they made them into tropes. That's my personal opinion.
Okay.
But I think they knew the world, the milieu. They knew rock musicians. I mean, there are lots of extras in the movie who are actual rock musicians, and there's a groupie at the beginning. A so-called groupie who's going on about pontificating about how great they are, and you just feel like you can touch them, and so
Yeah,
forth.
yeah.
That I believe was Waddy Wachtel's wife, and Waddy Wachtel played guitar with with Keith Richards and with Warren Zevon and Jackson Brown, a million people. So they hung out with people like that, I think.
Yeah, and
so
I think
they
the
just knew
comic
it.
scene and the musician scene, especially in New York, they really cross-pollinated. Like, because musicians want to be comics, want to be actors, and
I think you're right.
actors want to be musicians.
Yeah.
One thing I was always surprised at is, and I know certainly when we started Song Talk, we wanted to do a show that was very kind of specific and talking to basically songwriters. And like, if you're not a songwriter, you might not find this show interesting, and that's fine. And there's pressure to sort of, no, it needs to be more general. That how many specific musician jokes that only musicians would get is in the film.
Yeah.
And the more times you watch it, the more they kind of pop up.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, in the song Big Bottom, you notice actually everyone's playing bass,
Yeah.
Oh, I never noticed that.
and the bass player has a double neck.
Yeah, he
bass
has,
guitar.
he has even more bottom than anyone else.
But he has, like, if you're a musician, there's no possible reason to have a double neck bass guitar with two bass necks on it.
Right. Although in this case, I think one of
Maybe
them is
they're
an
tuned
8-string bass, so it has
okay.
it's like it has strings tuned up an octave. But even so, there's no reason to have that.
No.
Well, the one thing I noticed upon second viewing just very recently is I think when he's talking about his personality on stage as a guitar soloist, and they rip to that thing where he's soloing on the guitar, just doing this thing just totally by himself, and then he grabs a violin and starts like scrubbing the guitar strings with the violin, but
With the bow. With the violin itself.
With the violin itself.
Yeah.
But the best part is a second later he stops to tune the violin.
Right. And
As if that's gonna matter.
And that's parodying Jimmy Page, who in
Right.
Led Zeppelin,
Yes.
who used the bow. So
Right.
Nigel Tufnell would take it one step
Further
farther
and use the actual violin.
Yeah.
Which I never noticed back then, but I noticed it this time. Like, that's
Right.
funny.
It's interesting that,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's a funny movie, but there are very few gags in it. There's only about 2 or 3 gags in it. Like, that's
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
Well, they're playing he's playing the solo, and he takes a violin. Okay, that's a joke. And then stops to tune it.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
that's a gag. And I think the other gag is just when he's playing that beautiful kind of piano piece.
Yes.
And
In
what's
D
it
minor.
called? Lick My Love Pump.
Yeah.
In
But
D
most of
minor,
it, the
sad.
humor
minor.
is all true to life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The very few kind of setup payoff kind of comedy bits like that.
Which is the thing that kind of gets me about this movie is that at times it is quite serious, and like you say, Phil, it is very true to life and is very real, which to me, like that sort of brings it outside of the realm of satire. It's no longer satire if you're being real.
Well, no, but I would disagree because I think it needs to be real in order to be effective satire. There needs to be reality because otherwise it's just jokes.
It needs to be rooted in reality, but the things that can happen can be absurd and whatever, right?
I think yes, but I think that in order for you to feel anything other than just jokes, like for instance, when David St. Hubbard's girlfriend Janine joins the band on tour, it's like anyone who's been in a band, but also anyone who's been in a sort of boys' club. Or girls' club, for that matter, where suddenly there's a new person who wasn't part of the thing and who's pulling the attention of one of our members away.
Yeah.
Like, it's quite poignant, really. You can see he wants to go to the back lounge of the bus and hang out with him. He says, well, they've got that game, and I'd like to, and she's looking at him like, yeah, but why aren't you here with me? I've come to join you on tour. And I find it quite poignant. Like, I find it's like, yeah, I've been in that situation where the girlfriend, whoever it is, appears, and now that person is torn. Yeah. And it sort of upsets the ecosystem, basically. But if that didn't move me, then it would just be a joke rather than something that made me feel it.
And I think the rootedness in reality makes it a satire and not a farce.
Yeah,
and I
can
think
see that.
that's the difference.
Yeah, I guess
there is,
yeah.
And one of the things I've always talked about, and I think if you're not a musician and if you haven't been into a band for a long time, especially when you've been dealing with managers and you get to that, there's a very, very intimate relationship between people who are often maybe a little bit not insecure in terms of an artist sort of way.
Sure.
But they're very, very open to this other person, and there's love, and that's what was so great about that movie is anyone who came in between Nigel and David was going to be the other woman.
Yes.
There
No matter who it was.
Yeah, they were each other's significant others.
Right.
And everyone else is going to be cheating on them.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you could tell it's like Nigel was looking at that girlfriend, not like someone who was annoying him, but as basically someone
threat.
who was stealing his
Yeah.
mate.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and that's
and there's echoes of the Beatles there
Oh,
with,
yeah.
with Yoko Ono.
Well,
you
that's what I
know?
was about to say, because when I was young and saw that movie, I hadn't been in any bands at that point, but
Right.
I realized the echoes with Yoko Ono
Oh, yeah.
and all that sort of stuff. I'm like, this is the same story
Yeah.
over and over again, right?
But it's the same story played out all the time.
Yeah.
And I love, speaking of of David St. Hubbins and Nigel Tufnell. At one point, Marty DeBurgi, the director, asks Derek Smalls, the bass player, Harry Shearer. He says, "What's your position in this? Because if he's fire and he's ice, what are you?" And he said, "Well, I'm in the middle. I'm lukewarm water."
Lukewarm water. That's brilliant.
which is fantastic, really. and his character, that's actually what he is. An
Yeah.
overcompensating lukewarm water kind of guy.
Like
for
after
whole-
the Stonehenge bit where he goes, okay, practical question.
Yeah.
Are we doing Stonehenge tomorrow?
Yeah.
Well, and it's true that is a role that someone in a band will play.
Yeah,
You
the
know, there'll be a person
mediator.
who's a mediator
Yeah.
who basically says, hey, let's try to work this out. And
Yep.
it's really tough. And that's why when bands do break up, they're so acrimonious and people just hate each other for the rest of the time.
Yeah.
And it's not a business breakup. It's because it's a marriage breakup.
Yeah.
Because being in a band is like being in a marriage. Like
Yeah.
lots of yelling and no sex.
Well, there's a huge amount of ego involved, and it's not because the egos are so huge. It's that I believe it's because you need your ego to survive in show business, and also most performers are needy that way. I am, and so I mean less so than when I was in my 20s, but still I recognize it. And so I think that you end up with people who. When they're together, everything is more or less fine. But as soon as they separate, everything's upset, and there can be genuine hatred, which is tough.
Yeah.
And I think you get, in my experience, you can get people who are brilliant musicians who don't have a lot of people skills or coping skills. They just have the ability to play an instrument really well.
Yes.
And they have some creative ability, but they don't have a balanced temperament to deal with it.
Yeah.
And that causes all kinds of problems. It's not a music movie, but there's a Woody Allen movie, Bullets Over Broadway, where this guy's trying to get money for his Broadway show, and he gets financing from a gangster, provided he puts the gangster's mall in his show, and he ends up the bodyguard starts writing it and gets lethally protective over his creation. And I kind of, see that in some bands too, where people go, well, I wrote a really good riff and it's going to be in there, and they will get lethally protective of something. They don't have, negotiating skills or management skills. They just have great talent with their instrument, and they're scarier than the other people in the band.
Right.
And so they get their way, or, there's some really odd people making music out there, and it's a wonder that there are so many bands that last so long.
As long as they do.
Yeah.
Well, and think about, people who play together really well, because musicians playing together well it's kind of a chemistry thing. I mean, professionals like studio guys can go in and make anything work.
Mm-hmm.
But I think most bands, it's, you two people meet and there's like that kind of magic that happens. But sometimes those people don't get along. Like Sting and Stuart Copeland.
Yeah.
And they were magic together, but man, they never liked each other
No.
ever, apparently, from day one.
No, that's true.
And
Yeah.
I just
or like the Kinks. So when you get, or Oasis, when you get brothers in a band, that just seems so dangerous.
Yeah.
well, they seem uniquely dysfunctional.
But in Spinal Tap, I think the relationship, it's a love story. It's kind of the arc that keeps it going, because I don't think
Yeah.
you'd be interested in just a bunch of musician jokes.
No.
And there's
Yeah,
this,
fair enough.
there's these people who you get to know, and it's their love story. And, and you feel, as you're saying, Blair, it's quite poignant in places. Like, you see the look on Nigel's face when the girlfriend shows up, and he's just heartbroken, and his first, well, she's just dropping something off. No, she's coming on tour with us. Isn't it great?
Isn't it great?
It's not
yeah.
great.
Yeah. And then when Nigel leaves the band, spoiler alert,
Yeah.
when Nigel leaves the band and they're discussing what they're going to do next, I've been in that situation. I used to think that with my band, it was great that we got signed, and it was great that we were on the radio, and it was great that we were touring, and playing bigger places, and all that stuff was great, of course. But in the back of my mind, I'd always be thinking, what happens when we get dropped? And I used to think it'll be the end of the world. Life will be over.
Right.
And so when it happened, I wasn't really. I was prepared in that I'd thought the scenario through, but really not to any kind of conclusion. And it was tough. It was really tough to go through. So revisiting that scene in Spinal Tap, like where they're trying to regroup and figure out what do we do now. That's poignant for me. No question.
It's a rejection.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just business because you've been making a living doing your passion project.
Yeah.
Which most people don't get to do.
No.
But then the money says, your passion, it's not good enough.
Right. Or even offhand casual remarks by people who don't know you. The scene where they're in a hotel room and they hear the song from their old band, Listen to the Flower People. They hear it on the radio. And then the DJ says, that's what was the name of the band?
Flower People?
Was it Flower People?
No,
Yeah.
the Thamesmen.
Thamesmen, yeah.
Thamesmen,
The Thamesmen,
yeah.
who later turned into Spinal Tap, who are currently residing in the Where Are They Now file.
Yeah.
And up until that moment, the band is thrilled that they're on the radio, and then they're like, oh. and that kind of thing can be said by people, and they have no idea that they're killing you.
Yeah. Yeah, it was great just watching their face because you just really felt for them. And because you felt so, and that's, I think the editing, I think Michael might be able to talk about this after the break a bit more, because I think it's actually a very well edited film.
Yeah, I think, and maybe you have some information, I think they hired a documentary photographer, DOP, and shot it as if it was a documentary.
Oh, yeah.
Didn't
I could
tell
see
him, how to set up, or didn't block out shots. They just go, okay, this is a documentary.
Well, and also the element of improv in there, like it just seems like they're just acting, like they're not really acting, but they're not working to a script. In other words,
yeah. Well, who wants to work with a script? It sucks up so much time.
No.
But talking about scripts, we have a little break coming up, and we'll be right back after these messages. For those of you just joining us, give your head a shake. You should have been listening from the beginning. But if you're just joining us, you're listening to Song Talk Radio, streamed on songtalk.ca. And tonight we're having a special movie episode talking about the cult classic, This Is Spinal Tap. It's the 35th anniversary of the release of Spinal Tap.
Wow.
Uh,
One of the greatest mock doc movies, definitely, and I'd say one of the better music movies. So don't forget, we'd love to hear from you. So tweet your thoughts about it, the movie, or any of your thoughts to us here at Song Talk Radio, or via email at feedback@songtalkradio.ca. We share your thoughts here on the show, so be polite. And you can find links to all the products, books, and web services we mention on the show on our resources page at songtalk.ca. Coming up on Song Talk Radio, April 23rd, funding sources in Canada. We've got Frank Horvat, a wonderful musician. He's going to tell you how to work with various funding options available to Canadian songwriters and composers. Show Me the Money.
Indeed.
And then on April 30th, Audio Insurgency.
Ooh.
Is that a band?
It's a duo.
A duo. Okay. Sorry. I didn't get that note. Sorry, Audio Insurgency. And if you're in the Toronto area, please join us at our next Songwriters Meetup on Thursday, April 18th from 7 to 10 at the Transact Club at Bloor and Brunswick. It's free to join and free to attend. So stop by songtalk.ca for the link to the Songwriters Meetup and more fun things.
Yes, I'll be hosting that one myself.
Yeah,
so
that's
that's
actually
will you?
2 days
Excellent.
from now.
Before we go any, or not, as we go further, I think we all really enjoyed This Is Spinal Tap. Can I call upon you for your favorite line or your favorite quote from that? Blair is our guest. Would you like to go first?
There's so many.
Yeah.
I
But
know.
the fact that you've asked me to go first means it's easier for me because I can just pick one of the ones that I love. I think my favorite is actually pretty sly, which is when the manager, Ian Faith, who carries around a cricket bat because and acknowledges in an interview with Marty DeBurgi that it's an affectation.
He's not a cricket player.
No, we had a manager. My band had a manager at the time who had a baseball bat handy at all times. So he had that thing going on. But they lose Spinal Tap. They lose the gigs that they thought they had in Boston, and the manager says, "Yeah, but it's okay. It's not a college town," which of course is ridiculous because there's every college in the world there.
Yeah.
It is the college.
It
town.
is the college town. Yeah.
Geez, I think it's hard to choose just one. I think there's such a fine line between clever and stupid, I think, is
Yeah.
because it actually applies to so much in life, doesn't
Yeah.
it? You know, it's what's one of my favorites. But
Yeah, I'm going to have to go with the most obvious one because it's the only one I remember from back in the day when I first saw the movie. And granted, upon second viewing, there are a lot of, like you say, Blair, like a lot of sly humor that I don't quite remember offhand. But of course, the all-time classic line was, well, these go to 11.
you know, and that's what
It's the petulant way he said it, too.
It's the tone of his voice and the way he says it, and it's the perfect way just to end that conversation.
So what happens is he's looking at a Marshall lamp, and he was saying that this Marshall lamp is special because everything goes to 11, and the
Marty DeBurgi
says,
yes.
"Well, okay, why don't you just make 10 louder and keep everything on 9?" And Nigel, who's again, there's people that we've not known,
too bright.
not too bright. He just looks at it and just doesn't understand what he's saying. He says, "No, but these go to 11."
So it's one more. It's one more, so it's louder.
Yeah.
Well, what's so interesting about that is, apart from the fact that it was just so true for every musician,
Yes.
you know, but Heather, who works in the scholarship field, so she's dealing with new students every year.
Yes.
And she actually uses this joke about turning it up to 11.
Yeah.
And the kids now have no idea what she's talking about because most kids have not grown up with knobs on audio equipment.
With numbers and marked
That's
on
right.
Sliders.
Unless they were
Sliders.
musicians. And further to that, Marshall actually, after Spinal Tap, came out with a series of amps that went to 11.
Really? Yeah.
In honor of Spinal Tap.
Yeah.
Never miss a
awesome.
business
No.
opportunity.
Which is great. Well, then there's like so many. It's interesting. I was watching a comic talking about the problem about the new Simpsons versus the old Simpsons when like Conan O'Brien was writing for it.
Yeah.
And he looked at like one scene, and back in the early Simpsons, each scene had about 5, sometimes or 8 jokes happening at once that you wouldn't necessarily see, and that's why you could watch it over and over again and still laugh because you're always finding new things.
Yes.
Whereas the new Simpsons, and in fact, Groening's has done a new show on Netflix. I forget what it's called. It's about like
The fantasy one.
it's a
with
medieval
fantasy
thing,
one.
yeah.
Medieval thing.
and you really notice it because the new ones only have like one joke at a time.
Yeah.
And it's funny, but it's just not as funny.
Right.
And the thing with this, with Spinal Tap, because I've seen it actually 3 times in the last week, because I wanted to go over this, and it still laughed. I was at lunch today, I was watching it and still laughing out loud, because much like Arrested Development, there is so many jokes for every line.
Yeah.
Little asides, little things that if you notice that are funny. Like there's this one time when they were after the debacle of Stonehenge, when they do a diagram of how big they want the stage prop for Stonehenge and screw up inches and feet. So it turns out to be really small. The manager is saying, "Well, this is all I've done. I have to do this. I have to work with hotels. I have to wrestle." Just a very slow aside. I have to wrestle the rent from the local Hebrews, which I don't even know what that means.
Right.
But it just goes by really, really fast. And I just sort of heard that today.
What is that?
What does that mean?
Slightly anti-Semitic.
I think it's showing
he's
he's
Jewish.
Yes, exactly, and showing the typical, perhaps English rock manager at that time.
I got a question for you guys. Do you guys think this is Spinal Tap? Does it appeal? I mean, clearly it appeals mostly to musicians, but how well does it appeal to non-musicians? Like, do you guys know non-musicians who really, really dig this movie?
I don't know any. I hardly know.
Yeah,
I hardly know any
non-musicians.
non-musicians.
So it's totally a musician nerd film.
No, I don't. I don't think so. Actually,
Roger
no.
Ebert said it was one of his top 10 favorite films.
That's right. In fact,
Okay.
he said, "This is Spinal Tap is one of the funniest, most intelligent, most original films of the year. The satire has deft, wicked touch. Spinal Tap is not that much worse than, not that much different from some successful rock bands." And he later placed in the film list of his 10 best of 1984, and later included in great movies in 2001. Oh, and here's something else.
But did he appreciate it because it's a well-made film, or does he appreciate it because it's got all these little?
I think it
jokes
is
in
a well-made film
yeah.
because it's very even-handed in its
Yeah.
satire. It's mocking the industry. It's
Yeah.
mocking the
Yeah,
band
of course.
itself, and it's mocking the style of documentary.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of that as say, Hey Geography, where you have the person making the documentary inserts himself into it, like Roger and Me, like Sherman's March.
Right.
These
Yeah.
kind of documentaries where it's the filmmaker's point of view on this
Right.
particular subject.
Right.
So everything is up for examination and mockery. So the fact that it's about music, I think, is notable because they hadn't made a mockery of a music doc before, but it could have been.
It could have been about,
been about
as
tennis.
Christopher Guest showed.
Yes, as he
with
went on
Best
to
in
do.
Show, he goes on to make mockumentaries about dog shows, and then about small town theater with Waiting for Guffman.
or the folk scene,
Or the folk scene with A Mighty Wind. I think in answer to your question, Neil, if it hadn't reached the general public as a thing, The Simpsons wouldn't have bothered with it. They wouldn't have had it. Wouldn't have done
That's
an
true.
episode
Fair
on
enough.
Spinal.
That's true.
Fair enough.
I mean, that's
Yes.
pretty mainstream.
Yeah,
Yes,
despite
absolutely.
with the young folk, I think it has penetrated pop culture, mass culture pretty deeply.
Yeah.
None more. None more black.
Well, it's that the kids
Yeah.
don't know where half the jokes come from, like the
No.
going
Well,
up to
yeah.
11 thing.
Yeah, well,
that's
it just becomes because it's become,
It's become a part of the culture.
The
Yeah.
zeitgeist, I think,
Yeah, the
is the
zeitgeist,
proper
yeah.
phrase.
Bugs
yeah.
Bunny,
Yeah.
like Merry Melody cartoons, did the same thing where they would get passed down and there would just be
yeah.
references to certain things that you had no idea came from a Bugs Bunny cartoon.
Yeah.
It's just that's a funny thing to say when this happens. And,
That's why when I went and saw Carmen at the Met down in New York, I started laughing because all I could think of is all the Bugs
Bugs
Bunny
Bunny
stuff I've
cartoons?
seen it in.
Right.
And all
Yeah.
Well, and how about this? In 2002, this is Spinal Tap was deemed culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant by the U.S. Library of Congress and was selected for presentation in the United States National Film Registry.
Wow.
So it's
I'd
an
say it's pretty
important-
mainstream.
It's an important
Yeah.
movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, here's a question for you guys. Have any of you ever seen there were CD-ROMs of Spinal Tap? Remember when CD-ROMs were a thing?
Oh, cool.
And they'd have a movie, but then there'd be lots of commentary and additional material, and maybe find your own ending kind of thing. There'd be options
Yeah,
and so
yeah.
forth. So Spinal Tap came out on CD-ROM. It came out on VHS, and then it came out on CD-ROM. So there's a commentary track. The commentary track on the CD-ROM, the original one, was the three actors, Nigel, David, sorry, I have to get their real names.
Michael McKean,
Michael McKean,
Christopher
Harry
Guest,
Shearer,
Harry
Christopher
Yeah.
Guest, talking. And by the way, Harry Shearer in the middle between the ice and the fire. And so in the stereo spread, if you're listening on your computers, but you've noticed that,
Oh,
right?
really?
And they talk about the film, and it's very enlightening because they're talking about, this is so-and-so's wife, and this is, isn't Bobby Fleckman is amazing. She's great. And Fran Drescher went on from there to make The Nanny. Like,
Yeah.
she wasn't famous when she was in the movie, when she was in Spinal Tap.
Right.
So there's that. But then when it came out on DVD, it's brilliant because you have the three guys commenting again, Harry Shearer in the middle, etc., but they're in character. So they're commenting as if they're the band.
Right.
And so when they see Marty DiBergi, they're like, "Oh, this wanker," like that. And then at the point quite early in the film where he asks them about reviews that they've received, and your album Shark Sandwich, it was just a 2-word review. Can I say it?
Possibly not.
Excrement sandwich is essentially what he says.
Except it started with an S.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So so the guys commenting, they're incensed. Why would he bring that up in their in their fake English accents? Like, what a wanker! What a bloody wanker! That hurts our feelings. Like what And it's so entertaining. It's easily as entertaining as the film once you've seen the film.
Yeah.
It
So
wouldn't
just
stand on its own.
They
but,
improvise all over again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's so great. I urge you to seek that out if you're a
That
fan.
scene where they're sitting around, that's when they talk about the drummers and their history.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And that's one of my favorite lines.
But
in
it's
it
so pretentious. They're
because
in
it's
front
so
of a big
small.
castle, and
Yeah.
then one of them's wearing a kilt. kilt because you know, like that affectation of a rock band to sort of, you know, anyway.
Yeah.
Apparently the band Deep Purple saw the movie and didn't know that it was a joke.
Right.
I've heard that. Yeah.
And Aerosmith too.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Oh,
Yeah. Because they just released an album that had Stonehenge or something on the cover.
seriously?
Yeah.
Well, the problem with me is because at the time when I saw it,
Yeah, you
I was
thought it was
totally into punk and alternative, so I had no idea what metal bands were.
Yeah.
And they seemed kind of like not that far off from Motley Crue or any of the other bands. So I thought, well, I guess this is real. That's why I was.
I met a few of them, and there's one band in particular that is Spinal Tap. Their complete thick-headedness, like they're just not very smart people, and they're absolutely serious that they're curing cancer. It was hilarious this is when I was working at Much, and they came in, and they were a pretty big band, and they're just to a man.
Would you like
stupid.
to say?
Yeah.
And well, it might poison your listeners if I did say who it was.
Got it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So tell
I'll
us
go with
after
that.
the show.
That would be too bad if you told us. Yeah.
Obviously, the Carpenters.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
they-
it was hilarious listening to them talk about these, you know, soccer anthems with guitar solos as if they were, you know, going to go into the Library of Congress.
Right,
That,
right.
You know, and how it brings people together, and it's just, oh my God.
Now, can we talk about the songs for a minute?
I wanted to talk. Yes, thank
Yeah.
you.
They're great.
They're great,
They're
but
surprisingly
here's
good.
the thing: they're not really true even to the metal of that era. The 1980,
no.
84, like that type of metal. You know, the high voice singer. You know,
Yeah.
like and so forth. They weren't like that. They were more like a hard rock band kind of songs. I mean, they were smart and funny and stupid at the same time.
They were kind of progressive rock in a lot of ways.
Well, certainly all that stuff about Stonehenge.
Yeah.
But and also
Nobody knew who they were.
yeah. Well, I've
or
got
what
that
they were
here. Yeah.
doing.
Well,
In
I thought
ancient
it kind of
times.
suggested
Yeah,
different
yeah.
periods in their musical career. They had their pop
Yes.
period.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
they had their.
I actually prefer
Right.
the songs from their heyday back in the '60s, like when they were the
Thamesmen?
the Thamesmen,
And the
yeah,
new
yeah.
originals?
Yeah, the new originals.
So why don't we talk about Stonehenge since you've
Okay.
brought it with us?
Well, I just wanted to read it out loud. In ancient times, hundreds of years before the dawn of history, lived
hundreds of years.
a strange race of people, the Druids. No one knows who they were or what they were doing. I like that as well. What they were doing. But their legacy remains hewn into the living rock of Stonehenge. Stonehenge, where the demons dwell, where the banshees live, and they do live well. Stonehenge, where a man's a man, and the children dance to the pipes of Pan. Hey! Stonehenge, 'tis a magic place where the moon doth rise with a dragon's face. Stonehenge, where the virgins lie, and the prayers of devils fill the midnight sky. And you, my love, won't you take my hand? We'll go back in time to that mystic land.
Isn't there something about a cat's meow there?
Yeah, I think later, I'm not sure I printed the rest of that.
Yeah, see, actually, in later on in high school, like after this movie came out, my band in high school, we went to the studio, recorded like 3 songs, and we did this little preamble thing where I was just pounding on a floor tom, and our bass player put on a fake Scottish accent. He did sort of a monologue, a la that sort of ancient time sort of thing. So, yeah.
But then you compare that with Big Bottom, which we referred to
Yeah.
earlier.
What you find so?
The bigger the cushion, the sweeter the pushin'. That's what I said. The looser the waistband, the deeper the quicksand. Or so I have read. That's, to me, that's amazing.
Where would you have read that?
Yeah, exactly. My baby fits me like a flesh tuxedo. I love to sink her with my pink torpedo. Oh, anyway.
Yeah, those are not even double entendres.
No,
Those are
no.
single
Single
entendres.
entendres,
Or like
for
the other one,
sure.
Sex Farm, that comes up later.
Oh, well, I've got that here
that's
too.
because that's
Yeah.
such an
Sex farm?
advancement from the earlier stuff, which was stupid. They really sort of took a serious look of sex farms.
Yeah, that's right. It was in depth. I like to listen to what the flower people say. I
Yeah.
like that a lot.
Yeah.
Listen. Yeah. Shh.
Well, what's great is all those bits are so iconic. If you really pay attention to how they wrote those songs, they were perfect of that time. I mean,
Yeah.
the first one, "Give Me Some Money," we had a little bit of Beatles, a little bit of the Kinks,
Yeah.
and they just had it perfectly. And then the Flower People, with the sitar solo and
Yeah.
then the break with the kind of marching drums, which again were everywhere there. It was
And their first drummer, people may or may not have noticed, was Ed Begley Jr.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
It was actually pretty.
There's so
And the
many
other drummers
cameos in
in it
that
were
Was he
movie.
the one who
actual
spontaneously
rock band
combusted?
drummers.
He's one of them.
Well,
He's one of them.
Yeah,
No, he died in a bizarre gardening
accident. That's
Which
right.
the,
Yeah, they didn't want to investigate it. Best not solved or something.
Yeah, the authorities believed it was best not solved. That's
I always thought, when they run into that big rock star who's doing really well with Howard Hessman.
Right.
I thought that was Eddie Van Halen, but apparently I don't think it is.
No, I don't think it is either, and I'm not sure. I definitely don't know off the top of my head who it is. Howard Hessman was the manager, though.
Yeah.
And dismisses them beautifully.
Their drummer through it was actually his R.J. Punnell, and he's the drummer for Atomic Rooster.
Oh, I
So
didn't
he's
know
actually
that.
a real drummer, yeah.
Huh.
Yeah,
So-
and Vic Savage is a real keyboard player. from
This was actually a thing that I wasn't really aware of. If that was so much a trope of bands having drummers dying all the time, like where did that come from?
Well,
Because drummers are replaceable.
replaceable.
Neil.
sorry, drummers out there, but my band probably had 6.
really,
Yeah,
Really?
and we had two main drummers who were mostly there most of the time.
Okay.
But then hard times hit in one way or another, and we ended up with, on one tour we had 3 different drummers.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it was a scramble to teach them the songs.
I'm not a drummer, but I've played one. No. But is it easier when you're replacing band members because you don't have to learn chords and changes as much to replace a drummer than another?
Well, yeah, in theory, the drummer can just play through, even if there's stops and stuff. The drummer can just, boom, ba, boom,
Yeah, you
boom,
can,
ba.
you can learn the
Yeah,
song
and-
eventually, but
yeah.
you can.
But if you
make
play
do.
through, at least you're keeping the beat and you're keeping time and you're pushing things along.
Right.
Playing with a drummer who's unrehearsed, though, is really torture.
Well, and the Jitters stuff was not super simple. So it was,
There was nothing like Stonehenge in there, but no.
But
No,
pop
but
songs need-
we had pushes and we had stops and starts and
Yeah.
and so forth. So there were parts to learn, definitely.
yeah. So it
And,
does take some
challenging,
time.
yeah.
But I thought actually
Okay.
the songs were actually pretty serviceable. I mean, the songs for something like this could have been really thrown away, but I thought they actually were fairly catchy and
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
again,
definitely.
was there an album that came out at the same time?
Yes, they released an album.
The same time as the movie.
I don't know if it's the same time. I think
Or
they
shortly
probably
after?
did that after
It-
the phenomena hit.
Okay.
It was called "Break Like the Wind," as I recall.
Oh, okay.
And they, but Spinal Tap, by the way, is they were Harry Shearer in specific was launched a huge lawsuit because he wasn't receiving any royalties at all, and they owned the movie. So they owned it.
Right.
So he should have been being paid for many, many years, and apparently he got a big settlement. But it caused the investigation into how movies are distributed overseas and how money is collected and so forth.
yeah, no, I remember hearing about that.
Yeah,
That would be-
not that long ago.
Yeah.
In fact.
Of course, he has all that Simpsons money, so he's probably doing okay.
That's
but-
not
Probably.
the point.
That's not the point, though. Yeah.
Now he's put out, by the way, as in his character Derek Smalls. You can find the video on YouTube. He put out a song. I wish I could remember what it was called. Maybe somebody could look it up. But Derek Smalls is reflecting back on his life, and it's really kind of fantastic because the video is beautiful. It looks like it's on the Welsh coastline or something. I'm not sure. Like it's like really dramatic and beautiful and pompous and pretentious, and it's great. It's really funny. So yeah.
Gee whiz.
It's amazing how it's able to ride the proper note of making fun of them, but also loving the characters.
Yeah.
It's really easy, I think, for a movie like this to kind of go off and get nasty or
cynical.
or cynical.
Yeah,
but it
true
just
that.
there's so much love.
You're rooting for them.
Yeah,
Yeah, of course.
Which I think is part of the genius of the movie. You want them. You kind of wish, even though they're hapless and so forth, when they have a hit record at the end. Spoiler alert: when they have a record in Japan and
Yeah.
the band decides they're going to go tour there. I don't know about you guys, but I felt like,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's a happy ending.
It's a
Yeah,
happy
yeah,
ending
absolutely.
to a film that could be
And
really.
it also makes fun of the fact that, these bands were getting, that were going nowhere. We'd get a hit in Japan like Cheap Trick or someone, and they would be huge overnight.
Did you guys ever see the Anvil documentary of about
Yes.
10 years
Yes.
ago?
Oh yeah, yeah.
or no, not even 10 years ago, 6 years ago,
I
something
was
like
at the
that.
opening, actually.
What's that?
I was at the opening.
Oh,
actually.
well, there you go.
Yeah.
Well, it is structured very similarly to Spinal Tap.
It is.
It's a hard luck story, and at the end, they have a hit in Japan.
That's a mockumentary, or
No,
No, it's
No,
real.
It's about the band Anvil, who are from Oshawa, I believe.
Okay.
Hamilton. Hamilton?
No, they were definitely from that way.
East side.
Okay.
East side, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
And
The schwa.
yeah, it was Whitby or Oshawa, somewhere out there. The leader of the band, his brother was my accountant for a few years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Small world.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's well, and I think one of the things is I think the acting is actually sometimes people overlook it. I think the acting is actually pitch perfect all the way through.
Yeah.
because there's especially when you watched it multiple times, you really notice these little details.
Yeah.
like when like the band is broken up and Nigel comes back to sort of wish them well for their last concert and is backstage, watching them play, and you can tell he's sort of wanting to do
Wishing.
it.
Yeah.
And then his friend David looks at him and just sort of nods his head, to come back out. And the minute they start playing again, there's like this kind of joy between them.
Oh, yeah.
Which only
very
happens when
much
you
so.
have those two people who've broken up and then they're back together. And it's like, they're
Here
just,
we are.
Yeah. and
Got
they're
the
just-
band back together.
Yeah, and there was just so much pure joy there.
I agree. And
So
and
beautiful.
again, not to harp on the cameos, but there's so many, they're like Easter eggs. Do you guys remember the scene? And I mentioned it earlier, where they're trying to find the stage. They're going through the backstage, rock and roll,
Yeah, yeah.
and so forth.
Right.
And they come upon a janitor,
Janitor? Who's the janitor?
Bo Diddley.
That is Bo Diddley.
Yeah.
Diddley? Oh, my
Yeah.
God.
Oh, wow.
And the woman who makes Stonehenge the wrong size
Yes.
is Angelica Houston.
Yes, that's right.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's right.
Oh, yeah.
I only recognize Billy Crystal with the mime thing.
Dana Carvey was also
Dana
one of
Carvey,
the
yeah.
mimes.
Mime, yeah.
Oh, he's
One of the mimes, yeah.
Okay.
And of course,
Bobby Fleckman.
And,
Paul
and
Schaefer.
Paul
is-
Schaefer. of
Paul
course.
Schaefer as the record
Oh,
promo
yeah,
guy.
yeah.
Yeah, which,
I'm not
Howard
asking, I'm
Fufkin?
telling. Artie Fufkin.
Artie Fufkin.
Yeah.
what a great
Yeah.
name.
Yeah. I'm not asking, I'm telling. Kick this ass.
Again, someone you go, wow, he's actually a pretty good actor. You sort of like, because you just see him doing the Dave Letterman thing and just kind of
Yeah.
standing there.
But in this case, he's acting like a record promo guy. It's funny, because we the Jitters encountered, like, our first publicist reminded me so much of Bobby Fleckman, and I made the mistake of saying so because I thought that was funny. I told her I should never have said that. She was lovely. I'm sorry.
I guess those the only people that get kind of poked with a sharp stick are the record people in Spinal Tap. The musicians get treated lovingly, even if they are,
Yeah, true
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love the thing at the
sharpest.
end when the credits are rolling and they ask and Marty DeBergie's asking them what they would be doing if they weren't in a band, because it echoes the Beatles again, and of course for me that's everything. And Nigel Tufnell says, well, and he's sort of like, well, Ringo was asked that, and he said he would probably be a hairdresser. So Nigel Tufnell at the end of the film is, well, I suppose I could work in a chapeau shop. And would you like to try this hat on? And he's acting it out the way he would be in the hat store.
Right.
Do you wear
It's so
brown?
charming and lovable. Yeah.
And of course, what's the best line about that, which closes out the show?
Oh. You don't stump me.
Do you think you would really be happy doing that? To which Nigel replies, says, well, I don't know. What are the hours?
That's right. And that's the very end. Yeah.
it's just
beautiful.
Yeah, there's so many little
It's
bits.
very rich.
Yeah.
Yeah, I knew it so well. I was going, okay, I know, like I was waiting for laugh lines, and there's a few that kind of took me by surprise.
Yeah.
At the very end, when the manager is talking about Sir Eaton Hogg.
Dennis Eaton Hogg, yes.
He's opening up a home for the very pale. Or so they
It's a camp for
A
young
camp-
pale boys.
Young
That's
pale
right.
boys.
I think that's an important distinction, actually,
Yeah.
Phil.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, no, that's, there's
Yeah.
this nicely
I just
worded,
love that his name is Eaton Hogg. It's a hyphenated name, but it's funny.
as all proper
Yeah.
English upper class
Yeah.
names are.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so much to this movie that it's like I've seen it so many times. I have the DVD, and it's well worth watching. And you can actually buy the DVD. We have a link on our site. So you can buy
very
the
good.
DVD.
Well, hopefully it's the one with the commentary track, because you got to
Yeah,
check
the
that out.
special edition.
Definitely gotta
I
check
have
that out.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's an amazing it's an amazing movie, and I I could talk about it forever because it's got so many little bits. And the songs, I thought, we didn't get a chance to talk about the songs too much.
Not too much, but no, I think they're good, solid songs. I was surprised even at the time, though, that they didn't sound like the metal that I was expecting a band that looked like that would produce.
That's an interesting question. I don't know. Yeah, because that is true, because it is kind of soft, but I'm not sure how that would...
Yeah, it's not 80s
for most people,
hair metal.
If that might have actually put the wrong kind of twist on it.
Yeah, might have. Might have made it too serious.
Yes. Well, and speaking about the band's playing, so I guess it's time for us to leave.
Bye.
Because that's all the time we have tonight on Song Talk Radio. Special thanks to our guest, Blair Packham.
Thank you.
Sir. Always great to have you on. Blair, what's happening at Song Studio?
Song Studio is from July 20th to 26th this summer at the Royal Conservatory of Music on Bloor Street in Toronto. And we have, I think it can be announced, we have Simon Wilcox, who's written a bunch of hit records. We have a whole bunch of great guests, and it's going to be amazing.
Wow. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Is the early bird special going still?
Well, it's still relatively early, but the price is climbing every day, Phil.
All right. So sign up today.
Exactly.
Send us
Songstudio.ca.
Songstudio.ca. Why don't you send us your impressions via Twitter at Songtalk Radio, via email at feedback@songtalk.ca, Facebook and YouTube at Songtalk Radio, or stop by the site at songtalk.ca. Subscribe today to the Songtalk Radio podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher.com, Spotify, Podcast Addict, and everywhere you can find podcasts. And don't forget to sign up for the free newsletter at the site as well. You can find links to all the products and books and web services and DVDs we mentioned here on Song Talk Radio on the resources page. And if you happen to be in the Toronto area, why don't you stop by the Songwriters Meetup this Thursday, April 18th from 7 to 10 p.m. at the Transact Club. Free to join on meetup.com and free to attend. Stop by the site and click on the link for the Songwriters Meetup. Thank you, Linda Lavender, for taking care of all the social media. And Rita, I'll get your name right. And Micah Torin, thanks so much for doing the social media stuff. And most of all, we'd like to thank you, the home listener, because without you, we're just a bunch of nerds in a room. You can follow Neil at
neilmodi.com.
You can follow Blair at
Blair Packham.
At Blair Packham. And Linda Lavender
At lindalavender.com.
And Michael, you're not doing
I'm not in the mood to be followed right now.
All right. You can follow me at the Phil Emery. And stop by the website, songtalk.ca, to browse past shows and find out how you can be a guest on this show. Thanks for listening, everyone, and keep on writing.
Keep on rocking.
Keep on rocking in the free world.